to the Decahedron RPG podcast, hosted by Joe. Welcome to the Decahedron RPG podcast. Enjoy the show.
Hey everyone, this is Joe. This is the second part of our review of Legends of the Ancient World. We do our reviews, 3 good things, 3 bad things. This is all the negative stuff. So if you didn't hear the previous episode, don't listen to this one because that's awfully unfair to the game because this is just the negative stuff. We talked about all the positive stuff in episode 118. So go listen to that episode, then listen to this episode. If you only have time for one, listen to that one because like I said, it's very unfair to hear only the negative stuff. The other thing is that this episode's dropping on Wednesday. The deadline for the next giveaway is Friday. So you're running out of time. You need to enter. We only have 4 entries right now. With all that said, let's get started.
All right. And that moves us to the non-positives. And again, if you're listening and this is your favorite game in the world, don't be offended. Not every game is perfect. Every game has goods and bads. We're not saying this is the most horrible thing ever. This is just thing that we personally did not like the best in this game. So what are your number 3 non-positives, sir?
Okay, so I think that this game, and this is, even though it's short, right, which we always establish we both like, I think this is not a game for inexperienced players. There's got to be there's not enough here. Like if I just picked this up and I had never played a role-playing game before, I would have no idea how to play this game. That being said, I know that it's meant to be used for the Choose Your Own Adventure book, so I am taking a little out of context. Like that's why I started up by saying, if you just handed me this and said, this is a role-playing game, I think I wouldn't know what to do if I didn't already know games. But because I do know how to play, I can look at this and go, oh yeah, I got it. I can run this game. So I think if you're new, you might have trouble with a game like this if you don't have enough like experience with various games to kind of understand where the read between the lines, if you will.
Yeah, I'm going to agree with you 100%. That's something I didn't think of. It's not going to show up in my list at all. But you are absolutely correct, and I agree with you. And again, I agree. It's because it's what it's meant for. It's not meant to be a tabletop role-playing game. It's meant to be a group choose-your-own-adventure type thing. So role-playing rules wouldn't make a lot of sense. I guess I would say in kind of like the way we're talking about Jason. Well, I'm talking about Jason a lot today, but the way Jason talks about Rules Cyclopedia, that is like more of an SRD than a game. That definitely applies here. This is a Cliff Notes version of how to play. It assumes that you already have a lot of knowledge about other stuff. Yeah, I agree completely. My number 3 is that there were some rules that I found a little confusing. I already talked about the contested roles thing, and it's not that it's confusing. It's a mental break from the rest because you're always trying to roll low, right? Roll low, roll low. Oh, but now that I'm rolling against somebody else, I want to roll high. And I get why the decision was made because otherwise you're rolling low and then you have to do the subtract. Okay, I rolled a 4, but my skill's 13. 13 minus 4 is 9. I made it by 9. Okay, they rolled a 5 and their skill is right. And so it's much simpler this way. And I get it. It's just a little mental break. And I don't like that kind of discontinuity, if you will. And then there's another bit in the rules where it talks about skills being either required or assisted. And if they're required, that means, I don't know, like if you're going to try to pick a lock, you could say that this particular lock is complex. So if you don't have the lock picking skill, you don't have a chance to do it at all. But this lock over here, this is like the lock on your sister's diary. So, 8-year-old you can do it with a bobby pin. Anybody can try that. You don't need the lock picking skill. Okay, simple enough. I get that. And then they have assisted ones where, this is just a normal lock. So you roll your lock picking skill. And because my lock picking skill is 3, I get a +3 on that roll. Whereas your lock picking skill is a 1. So you only get a +1. Or Betty's is a 0. And so, well, it's not a 0. She doesn't have the skill. So she just makes a dex roll without any pluses. But reading it, it kind of sounds like if the skill is required, you don't get your skill level added to it. And that's just weird to me. Or the language was just underwritten, and you do get it, and they just didn't put it in there. But yeah, I didn't like that.
Yeah, so I'll do the last part first because I think that the way that you're describing it is exactly how I interpret it as well. If anybody can do it, then whatever. But if it says you need the skill, then you don't get the bonus. You only get the bonus if it's something anybody can try, but you have the skill. Which I kind of get in theory, but I think this is one of the issues with having 90% of the game being one thing, which is exactly what the problem is here. 90% core mechanic and then a couple things that are different. And it's like, well, hold on, it's weird, right? If you're going to make a game that has a core mechanic, it's got to be the core mechanic for everything. Otherwise, it gets very confusing. I will say though, I think that the contested check is actually kind of an interesting thing. I think you're right, and I probably wouldn't do it this way in this game because I would rather everything be the same. But you can choose how many dice you roll. That's the little tweak there.
Oh, yeah, I left that. Yeah, that part I love. That is great because you can say I'm going to risk it and add another fourth die.
Right. Like, let's say you had a 13 or something, too. You could say, oh, let's say you have an 11. You could be like, or a 10. You could be like, well, you know what? I'm only going to roll 2 dice instead of 3 because I have a better chance of not going over a 10 if I roll 2 dice and then hope that the other person goes over. And I kind of like that. It's a little bit of a gamble, but because it's so different than everything else, I can see that being like I could totally see people doing it wrong. You know, like not wrong, but like not understanding that's how it works. So, yeah, I think that have basic mechanics, try to make it as close as possible. But yeah, I actually kind of like the choose your number of dice. When I read that, I was like, oh, that's kind of clever, actually. It's a gamble there.
Yeah, I was thinking at some point, I was like, if you took that contested skill roll thing and made the whole game that way, I think that'd make a clever core mechanic. So it's always roll high, but you still have to roll under your skill level. But then you would say that tougher skills have a higher minimum number that you have to get. I think that would I think, but that's not the system here. So yeah.
No, but no, it's really you'd have to have like a DC or something. Like it's a DC 10 and you've got a 13. So do you want to roll 2 dice or do you want to roll 3? Or 4? If you want to risk it.
All right. What is your number 2, sir?
Because we're looking at it as a role-playing game sitting here in front of me, I had no idea how the karma/wish should work. I was like, okay, it tells me what it does, but doesn't tell you how to get it. It doesn't tell you when to assign it. Like just one paragraph saying, this is something that the GM assigns, whatever. But again, because it's not based on GM fiat, you can't do that because this is made to use something else. So I am kind of taking out of context. So I don't know that's fair to the system, but I didn't like that that's in there and I have no idea how to use it. Like it just felt like it was like not anything, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that is baggage from this not being intended for tabletop. It's like somewhere along the line, like in the very early paragraphs too, they say something about plot word. You can acquire a plot word.
Yes.
And that's the same thing, right? That's when you would go, turn to paragraph 171 and say, paragraph 171 said, the witch likes you and gives you a potion. You now have plot word potion or whatever. And so then when you come to another paragraph, it will say, if you have plot word potion, you have this option.
So fully, I'm not being 100% fair to the system and again, if the creators know people are using it as an RPG and they care, then just a little bit of writing about these things, like even just asterisks next to them at the bottom says, this is specifically for our adventures. Don't use if you're playing otherwise, kind of thing.
It's probably unfair of me, but I get the impression, based on nothing, but I get the impression that they don't care if you're using this as an RPG. They're just trying to sell their adventures.
Makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely don't think they're making quitting their day job to do this or anything. This is just something they enjoy as a side hobby, and this is what they do. All right. My number 2, non-positive, is the combat system. And this is definitely a Joe thing. This is a horrible combat system and no one should ever use it. I think this would definitely appeal to a lot of people. I am just not one of those. I am not a detailed combat person. And I very much like my combats to be theater of the mind. And this very much needs a hex map in front of you to say, I'm moving this many hexes, and there's rules for dodging. If you're going to dodge an enemy's attack, you need an empty hex next to you that you can go into. It's very much a board game, which makes sense. That's how Melee was when it came out. It was intended as a board game, not role-playing game. It was also intended as a drop-in combat system for D&D, but that's another story altogether. Yeah, as I've said before a lot of times in the show, I don't like tactical play. I don't think that my player who's playing, the grizzled old veteran warrior should have to be a tactical thinker, himself, the player. And so for me, it's a miss, but that's me, right? I mean, Steve Jackson got a lot of fans for writing Melee. So, all they're pretty much doing here is copying that. So this by no means am I saying this is an objectively bad thing. I'm saying for me, not my thing.
Yeah, no, I totally see that. It's funny, I didn't even consider that, right? If you're playing Melee, you need to have miniatures or something on the table because even things like the grapple, right? You get pushed back one or you move
Yep.
forward. It's very much where you are on the board. And if you're not wanting to play in a tactical way, then that's, how do you do the combat? It doesn't, you'd lose so much of the flavor of how it works. I think if you did that, it would be very difficult to play theater of the mind, like you say. I too do not like to play with miniatures usually and not very tactically. So even though I have actually brought Melee into my group a couple times thinking, oh, maybe we'll try to use this as a stand-in combat system. We never did because I don't want to put miniatures on the table all the time, or even chits or whatever. So I'm with you on that. But again, if you like that, this is good because I do think Melee does a good job with the tactical stuff without making it too complex. Like I've seen much more complex games. Like I think if you're looking for tactical combat that's not too crazy, because I'm definitely no expert, I think Melee does a good job. And this is, like you say, pretty much a clone of that.
And you're number one non-positive, sir.
So I didn't love the skills. And again, I don't know enough about Fantasy Trip to know how their skills work, but I thought some of them were very odd. Like, for instance, and again, unless maybe I'm misinterpreting this, but then that comes down to the structure. Like, you have Dwarvish, and then it says, speak Dwarvish on 3 IQ. So every time you want to speak Dwarvish, you have to make an intelligence check. That just feels really weird to me. Same thing for crafts. If you roll your score, you can craft that day. Like, it just seems really weird and arbitrary because then you've got literacy to learn a different language. Now, do you have to do it every time you try to read the language, or is it just once? Because that seems more powerful, right? So it just seems some of the skills just seem like they're weird, and it's almost like they just wanted to put them in there for no reason. I feel like for me, if I was going to have languages and things like that as skills, you would then break that core system and you just wouldn't roll. Like you'd be like, all right, well, you have Dwarvish, and if it's an ancient Dwarvish tongue or something weird written in Dwarvish or a code, then you can roll, right? That'd be your specific skill, right? That we talked about earlier. But otherwise, it should just be a skill. So I think I went through all of them, but I didn't make a list. But I would say a third of the skills, at least, I would just get rid of altogether, at least in their current format. So I don't love skills you have to roll for all the time. I prefer skills that are something you can do. And then if you roll, if there's a special circumstance, that's the way I like skills. So for me, this was not a hit as far as the skill system.
I will also say that because, again, it's based on the Fantasy Trip, and that's one of the earliest uses of a skill system, some of the skills are more like feats or talents or special abilities than they are like the charisma skill, or there was another one like it in the beginning. So I could see where you went there. So I guess when I said that the skills were on my like list, that was the overall skills system. Going down in the weeds, yeah, I could definitely give agreeance to some of what you're saying there. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think it's terrible. Like the system itself is good. I think that it's almost like they were just filling out a skill list. Like for instance, if you look at leadership just gives a bonus. Why didn't the languages do that? It just seems like it's a weird choices as to what they had you roll for. But again, maybe that's connected to the choose your own adventure thing. And maybe there's times where you reach a place where you have to interact with dwarves, and that's going to be fun part of the game to see if you can do it or not.
My biggest non-positive is the new version. So the version that we're reviewing here, the 2018 version, you can't get anymore. Or I think it's 2019 version. You can't get anymore. If you go to the website, the only thing that's there is the 2023. And they switched it. And then it's not even exactly called Legends of the Ancient World anymore. It's like there's the core rules, and then there's the character guide for fantasy, and then there's the character guide for Untamed West, and the character guide for time and space. I get what they were doing, because if you have these 3 books and you want to make an update to the rules, then you have to update 3 books. And so this makes it easy for them because they have just one that's the core rules, and then they have one each for the genre specific stuff. But then some of their divisions were weird because, I opened up the fantasy one to look for the spellcasting stuff, and that's where all the spells is. But spellcasting isn't in there. Spellcasting is in the core one. And they brought it down to 4 pages from the 8, and in doing so, they condensed some things. So, like in the version you and I reviewed, it says that, characters generally start with 32 points of attributes and 4 skill points, 2 of which can be combat skills. That's nowhere in the new version. And my guess is because each adventure book you buy tells you if you're making a new character, start with this many because they want it for that adventure. That's my number one non-positive, is that I do not like the new version.
Yeah, I agree with that. I actually, like I say, I looked at it first, and then I was like, oh, right, you attached this one, the older one. I looked, I was like, oh, okay, so I'm going to read this one. But yeah, exactly. It was shorter. There, it's broken up, and it's funny you say that because about the make a new character, and that's going to be in the adventure, which is probably true. But this very much stresses that you can carry characters over. So it's like, are they going to get away with that? I mean, like go away from that. I kind of like the idea that this allows you to make it again more like a role playing game. We can keep playing the same character over and over. If each adventure requires you to make a new character in the new book system, then it would be less useful as a role playing game overall for us that are just taking the free game and using it.
Well, I'm guessing it is, but the only programmed adventure I looked at was the Orc Pass one, I think it's called, that you can download for free. But I'm guessing that, like, you download adventure number 7 or whatever. And again, this is just a guess, so don't take anything as I say as gospel, and there's a high chance I'm wrong. But I'm guessing it says that this adventure is intended for 4 characters of X number of points each. So if you have a suitable one, use that one or make new ones. Or if you need to make a new one, that's how many points to use. I'm guessing it's going to be something along those lines.
Right. Well, that makes sense.
All right. So that was our list of positives and non-positives, which brings us to the overall impression. What is your thoughts about using Legends of the Ancient World as a tabletop role-playing game?
Okay, so going back to one of my negatives, that where I don't think it's good for new players. I don't think it's a complete game. So I think it's good if you are experienced and you like the mechanic of it. You could probably make it work, but it's very vague, right? It talks about magic character, not magic character. It doesn't tell you how that works. There's no prices for equipment. There's nothing beyond weapons. So there's not any flavor here that makes this any more than just a mechanic to sit on top of something else. So I think it's good, but I think if I was going to pick up something like this, I would just take Malay. And because again, I don't love Wizard, I don't love the spellcasting, so and do that. So I think it's good. I think that if you are unfamiliar, or let's say you like Malay and you want something deeper and free, because Malay is also, but Wizard's not. Then this is a great way to add spellcasting to it. And I think with an experienced GM or somebody who kind of knows what they're doing, that can add this to the world, it would work. So I'll give it it's good. I don't think I would jump to it right away.
Just to address some of the things you said before I give my opinion, it's interesting because, again, different people, right? I find the whole lack of a world, the lack of a cost list, all that, I view those as positives because I'm a world builder. When I get a game, I want to run my world. I don't want to run Greyhawk. I don't want to run Forgotten Realms. The only exceptions to that ever have been Paranoia and Star Trek. So, yeah, I view the lack of a world as a positive for me, but I see what you're saying. For a new player, that would be daunting.
I also build my own worlds, but I don't see this game as a game I would sit down and play a year-long campaign with, or even in 6 months, or because I wouldn't build a world for this game. This is I'm going to pick up a game and run it over the weekend game to me, and for that, I want some baseline. That's kind of where I stand as far as building, not versus building. Like if I'm going to run this twice, I don't want to take all the time to build a world. Like that's just how my brain works. But I can understand people that want to always do that. That makes sense.
So for me, if you asked me a few months ago, hey, Joe, what do you think of Legends of the Ancient World? I'd say, oh, it's great. It's, I have really happy memories of reading the game and everything. But again, when I first came across it, it's because I was looking for the fantasy trip and there was no way to get the fantasy trip. And now there is. In fact, just like you, I supported that on Kickstarter, so I have the huge box. So if I wanted to play the fantasy trip, I'll just play the fantasy trip. If I want to play this, I still think I'd play the fantasy trip. I think this would be good to hand to a player. Like if I'm going to run a fantasy trip campaign, I would hand this to a player as kind of, who can't afford the fantasy trip, as a way to get used to the concepts maybe. But yeah, for its day and age, when I first encountered it, it was great. It was wonderful. It was awesome. That was 12 years ago. In the times that have changed and come and gone, I think I've gone a little bit the other way. And yeah, I think it'd be good for a convention game. I think, like you were saying, a one shot, sit down, play it. But I don't think that this would be in my top 3 games. Hey, Joe, run me a fantasy game. I don't think this is going to come up in the top 3. It's going to bounce off my mind.
That's fair. That seems about right. I mean, I've had this discussion with a few other people too about like now that things are more available, like how much do we really need the retro clones if they don't add much to it? There might be a few things here. Again, I'm not an expert at the Fantasy Trip that are unique to this, but you could probably just add those couple of things to Fantasy Trip and have the original game. It feels like that would probably be a good course for a lot of people.
There's this thing in my mind, and it's been like, because I've been, working on this review for a while, not working like nonstop, but, it's in my head. I read the book and things bubble as I go throughout my day. And one of the things that keeps bubbling through my mind is if this is a Fantasy Trip clone, but I can just go by the Fantasy Trip, how do I feel about this ethically? And like back in 2012, I wouldn't have a problem with it. And again, rules aren't copyrightable. So and then I'm like, but if I have a kind of negative feeling on this about that, then why don't I have that same feeling for the D&D retro clones? And I don't. Like White Box Fantastic Medieval Adventure Game. I love. There's other ones, but that's my favorite for those. Although, but maybe that's because Wizards put D&D out under the OGL, and so they kind of had permission to make these, whereas Steve Jackson, Metagaming, never gave that kind of permission. And so here's these other people doing this thing, and then on top of that, they're just saying, yeah, we're not putting any permissive license on this. This is just ours. We own it completely, and you can't do anything with it. I wasn't even going to go here originally, but it's been in my mind. And the reason I wasn't going to go there is because I don't know what that disconnect is. I don't know why there's something inside me that feels this one is wrong, but doesn't have a problem with the White Box Fantastic Medieval Adventure Game or any of the Swords and Wizardries or whatever. I don't know. And because it's an uncompleted thought, I wasn't going to put it out there, but now I put it out there.
No, you know what? That's actually really interesting, and I agree. I think that they're right. I agree that I'm in the same position. Like I don't know what I think about it. Part of me says because it came out when the Fantasy Strip wasn't available, that's why it came out, right? And so I kind of would give it a pass. Like I wouldn't think, oh, this is bad that they're doing it, because it's not like they're changing anything. I mean, even though they're updating it, they're slimming it down, whatever. It's not like they're going into the Fantasy Strip and adding more stuff from it, right? I think if tomorrow somebody said, you know what, I'm going to make a Fantasy Trip clone, and there wasn't a license and Steve Jackson wasn't okay with it, then I'd be more on the side of going, yeah, why are you doing this? This game exists. And like you say, the OGL gave people permission to make these other games. So I don't think that that's, some people have issues with, I'm not going to name any specifically, but there are some games that are clearly very close to other games and they don't credit them. And you hear people talk about it. They're like, oh, this is really just a clone of this, but the creator never says anything. And I feel like that's a little bit of a shady ethical ground maybe. But though certainly probably not a legal ground.
This is the third review I've done in a row that has gotten into talk of licenses and copyright. It's clearly a passion of mine. But anyway, so overall, thumbs up or thumbs down. Rather than putting you on the spot, I'm going to start this one. I'm going to say thumb is firmly sideways. It's not a thumbs down by any means. And like I said, before I started working on the review, when I was just working from memories, it would have been a firm thumbs up. But as I was going through things and look at it more in depth and seeing the little warts and things, my thumb is sideways on this one.
Yeah, I agree with you there. I think this falls into the category of if somebody was running it, I'd probably play like my friend was running it, but it's not a game I would necessarily want to run myself. Like it's not something I'd go, I'm going to run a game in this system. So, but that would put it sideways for me, and I won't absolutely not play it, but it wouldn't be one that I'd go to run myself.
Well, that's everything I had to say about the game. Was there anything else you wanted to add before we wrap it up?
No, I just wanted to say thanks. I always like looking at these things. I love looking at and kind of pulling apart games. I mean, I'm certainly no expert in gaming. We all just like what we like, but it's always fun to hear what other people say and look at systems and go, oh, what's there? What's not there? Why do I think that's, air quote, good or bad? It's always a fun experiment. And I don't do it nearly enough myself these days because I turn away from games because I buy too many. Thanks for getting my head go around this because it's fun. It makes me want to pull up Malay after and play it because I got it sitting over there on my shelf.
It's funny what you say about buying too many. That's why I started getting into free games. And one of the very first free games I ever found was Fudge. And Fudge I just thought was a high quality product to begin with. And I should have added that to the review list. Yeah, so that's why I started seeking out free games in general. And I pick up a lot of games because I like to joke that I'm a frustrated game designer. And so I like to pick up games. And like a lot of people talk about picking up modules and like breaking them down for ideas. I like to do that with games. I like, oh, I like this mechanic. I don't like this. Like I was saying in the beginning about, gee, maybe that their contested mechanic would be a neat little core system for its own game where everything used that. And I'd have to think about that because I only, the thought occurred to me while I was doing it. And I was like, oh, but I'd have to put thought in there, see how well that would work. But yeah, I like to do that with games, break them down and see what I can use and steal. And yeah. All right. I'm going to thank you, Daniel, for joining this episode. I'm laughing because I'm reading straight out of the slide there. But no, I do thank you, sir, for joining me and for being on the show yet again. I think this is your third time in the show. So thank you, sir.
You're welcome. Always enjoy it.
And I'm thanking everyone out there for listening to us. If you have played Legends of the Ancient World or have you read it, let me know what you think. Or, either of the sister games, go ahead and give us some feedback. You can send it to feedback@decahedron.com, or there's a slew of other ways. They're all in the show notes. I do want to remind you that there is currently a giveaway happening. Speaking of fudge, I'm giving away a set of fudge dice because even if you don't play fudge, I think there are awesome uses for fudge dice. I'm not telling you what you have to do for that. You have to go back and you have to listen to episode 113. And episode 113 will tell you everything you need to do to be eligible for that giveaway. Daniel has the Bandits Keep YouTube channel and podcast and Unchained. And I keep hearing about this other podcast that you co-host with somebody. And I want to say it's Monsters and Treasure. Did I get that right?
That is correct. Monsters and Treasure with KR King from D&D Homebrew. We basically just talk, it's an RPG podcast, but we bounce ideas off each other and talk about topics and agree and disagree. So if you like that kind of stuff, then that's a fun one.
Actually, that was the original idea for this show. So yeah, I like that kind of thing. Okay, I think that's more than enough. Again, thank you, Daniel. Thank you for everyone else for listening. Do send feedback. Let us know your thoughts. And until next time, happy gaming, happy life. Bye.
Thanks for listening to the Decahedron RPG podcast. Please come back again to the Decahedron RPG podcast.